Hi there, Tech Coast Conference in Jacksonville. I'm bringing this to you as a later recording as I got taken out by a back injury a bit before a presentation. But what I'd love to bring you today is a short talk about how belonging changes the game for us. And basically, to be an elite force, you got to belong, because that releases the power of your team OS, which that'll change your whole game. So to start with, I want you to think about the highest performing teams you know. Could be business units, it could be a whole company for that matter, sports teams, special operations in the military, community groups for that matter, etc. Any of the things. They all have different skills, a reliance upon different attributes, wherein the individuals on each of the teams or groups contribute to a focused outcome through their performance. Depending upon each person's intent and types of practices, he, she, or she will perform at optimal and occasionally peak levels. But this only happens when the environment stability and predictability allows. And there's a difference, and I had a wonderful conversation a while ago with Rich Divany about optimal versus peak performance, which you can see many of his talks all over LinkedIn where he actually touches upon this. Optimal is what we get in our normal working because of so many different things that can throw the game off. Peak is when you have either a high level of controlled variables, so you can actually adjust and be in peak and be sustained in peak performance. Otherwise, peak performance is not very sustainable. Regardless of that, I digressed a little bit. Sorry about that. All elite teams have one thing in common, though, and it's very, very consistent. They have a high degree of belonging. And it's from that belonging they get the power of their team OS. And just to set the stage, your team OS is your sustainable levels of oxytocin and serotonin. This is what our neurochemical elements, our brain functioning on all cylinders to be a great team, if you want to think of it that way. So over the next half hour, I'm going to dive into how belonging first is core to our being. It alters how we fear and how we aspire. And that in turn really, really impacts how well we'll perform, period. How we belong is part of it's a tripart set of emotions that are always in play with us. And I'll be covering that also. And that's fear. We're always in belonging. We're always in some kind of aspirational state. If you don't believe me, think about your employees and so on. Some of them are in the game and they're ready to play at work. Others are basically daydreaming. And on the East Coast side of things, this is the Jacksonville Tech Conference, Tech Coast Conference. Let me fix that. If they're daydreaming about being somewhere else at a different company or in the Bahamas, because it is East Coast, they're aspiring to be in a better place. And this is a constant in neurobiology, but I'll be going to that in a little bit. I'll also be actually touching upon the elements that you know when you see them in good business. That's a pure function of oxytocin, as well as the elements also in good business, which are the pure function of having good serotonin levels. And I'll go into those two things because that's your team OS. But you only get those things in belonging. I mean, that's how we get it. Otherwise, we're in a cortisol spike that just kind of renders all that stuff kind of moot. In the ways that you can do this, I'll be addressing how belonging at no extra cost to you, but it will have to change the way you focus and how you interact together. That's what's going to put you into your high team OS that gets you in a high performance space. So let's get started. If the Tech Coast conference in Jacksonville had been a full live event, we all would have walked into the room. And I like to ask people, what's the first thing you do when you walk into a room? There's something you do either purposely or unconsciously, and it's you scan the room. And so in scanning that room, you're looking for something, somebody you know, a familiar face, body position, things that say, welcome, you're among friends. So if you had walked into the room and you'd seen this face, the one in the middle there, it's got kind of a looking you up and down kind of look, you're not going to have the feeling that you belong. And so you're going to have an uptick in cortisol. You're not going to be generating from that space a sense or a feeling. I don't want to use a sense of belonging, because belonging is a two-way street. It always goes both. When you belong, it's both ways. You feel for, you give, and you get. And that's what makes it belonging. Otherwise, it's kind of a dopamine rush, but I'm digressing again. I'll get to that later. When you walk into the room, though, you're actually scanning for this. You're scanning for a face that's smiling and welcoming you. This is why it's so important for one, your front desk person, to actually be happy and smiling and in welcoming and inviting people into the space. Why you have hostesses or hosts, male or female, in restaurants. They welcome you in. So you're not waiting there going, am I going to get served? Is the service going to be polite and kind? Is it going to welcome me? Am I invited? Do I belong at this restaurant? These things happen to us all the time, and it's a daily basis. Belonging is at our core. It's actually partially why middle school or junior high if you're my age, was such a tough time in life, because you really are trying to figure out how you belong in new circles outside of your child-parent roles. And in business, we come across this every day. We're joining a new company, onboarding and belonging. Huge people that belong in onboarding, and they get it and they give back into that space. They're the ones that stay working. The rest leave in about a year, if not less. But I'm going to go to those three areas so that you can actually get the picture of what belonging does for you. So belonging it kind of sits in the middle of everything. And it changes everything. When you belong, you fear less and you simply aspire more. And so what ends up happening is, when you're in a space of belonging, and this means you know somebody has your back and you have theirs. I use a particular definition of this, which is you feel, you own, and you care for the person, your teammate, and they return in kind. They feel, own, and care for you. And the big deal is, it's in successes, dreams, and failures. And if it's not in that, you're always in a state of conditional of being ousted. And in our tribal brain and heart, in our being, we have to be in that place. Otherwise, we're not safe. You could be in a crowd of people. You can be in a building with 100 cubicles, and you're all part of the same company. Yet, if you don't belong in that, you don't get that feeling. You don't have that feeling for, and you don't have the action that goes with that. You start second guessing that, and you're not safe. So what ends up happening is, on the good side of things, you go into a fear space of, I don't want to let my teammate down. And on the bad side, it's this could hurt. I could fail. Um, on the bad side, it would be, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what's coming next. And we're prone to, I don't know what's next, to be, I'm in danger. If you're on the good fear side, and this is what happens in belonging, you're like, I'm going to learn and practice more because I don't want to be that person that lets down the teammate. And so that space of belonging changes fear. You stay more often on the good side than the bad side. On the aspirational side, similar thing happens. Everybody has aspirations. It's a neurobiological constant. It's the same thing for fear. We're always in fear and we're always aspiring. I want to do this. Oh, dang, I might fail. I almost swore. Oops. And so you have to keep that in mind. On the good side, you end up going, I can do more for two reasons. One, somebody's got my back. For two, I've got this extra incentive that with somebody, we're going to make it to the moon. We might even make it to Mars. On the bad side, it's out of my reach as an individual. Anything that I aspire to that's beyond my individual capabilities, it translates into a space of kind of pre-failure. Why even try? Why even do it? And it's different when you belong, because when you belong, your brain literally fears less. You're going to fear some, but you're going to fear less. What also happens too is the aspiration goes more, because the person you're with, that you're in team with, you're going together. And so this is game changing in the way it works. Massively game changing. And what really translates is, in our normal thing, when we're alone, we go to fight flight once the things go beyond us and or the danger is present. In belonging, you go from fight flight to unite and fight together. And this is a whole different social dynamic. Matter of fact, the brilliance for us as human beings isn't in the fact that we have greater intellect. It's that our social, emotional abilities or intellect allows us to actually come together where we might normally be competing for a scarce resource. But together, we'll actually partition that off and go safely. Conversely, outside of belonging, fear actually increases. The longer we're in it, the more it goes up. And that actually has a terrible taxing space on our health, which, by the way, in the long game, really, really hurts performance. Elite teams cannot stay in a sustained amount of stress without recovery. That was another good discussion with Rich Divany on that. He's got such a wonderfully articulated discussion on that you have to take recovery time, and if it doesn't, it compounds. And without that, you're functioning at a less optimal space, and you're actually taking yourself out of a higher peak performance that you could do if you needed to draw upon it. Alone, again, belonging outside of it, keeps you in fight, and then leads to even greater isolation. The longer you stay out of belonging, the more isolated you'll pull into. And if I think in terms of mental health and how that happens in the workforce, and especially some of the stuff and how it was hard to go to a digital or video economy or way of doing business, I should say, that made for a lot more stress and a compounded level. So the isolation that comes with that, it all happens. These three things were always in at a constant time. They're going to flip back and forth, and you're just going to keep going and going and going. But when you're in belonging, you fear less and you simply aspire more. I kind of put it together in this bit of a graphic here, where it's like a lamppost. You come into the light of it, and you're like, ah. You start getting into the shadows, and you're like, oh, I don't know what's in the shadows, and I'm going to be in danger. And that's what happens. Now you start changing and going into a fear loop. By the way, if you're actually in a true danger situation, even that bad fear turns into good fear because it's actually saving your life. However, if in that, what if you're not in a place where you're really in danger, but the fear is there because you're isolated? And our brains, when we're isolated, say, time to just register fear. Together, it's a whole other thing. So keep that in mind. You're in the light of belonging at that point, and your aspiration changes. You literally go from, oh no, Gulliver will never make it, to, oh, let's do this thing. And that's a key place that happens there. To do this and to stay in that good place, you got to have a constant dose of your team OS. And you get this through, I'll provide just seven belonging lead measures. For any of you that have done an organizational operating system like 4 disciplines of execution, you could even do traction EOS. You're going to be doing things to get in focus, and things that change, things that actually move the needle. Those are lead measures. Lag measures don't. Like, you keep measuring what's my belonging quotient in my company, you're never going to change it. What you do have to measure is the ways that you would do things to up the levels of belonging actual. And so here are 7 ways that you can do things. It don't cost anything. And I can tell you this, that elite special ops can be in the most terrible of situations, and with their lives on the line for each other and in pursuit of the mission. And in that space, they'll still smile at each other. They'll still make a connection in sorrow with each other. They practice listening in all sorts of high stress moments. They're in a state where they can almost automatically give compassion. They're not withholding it, and they're making a choice to do this. They have each other's backs. The most common one that everybody likes to stress upon, the integrity thing, do what you say you'll do. And then they're also being thankful for each other. They're showing gratitude. And the reason I bring these 7 things up is they cover a gamut of our full experience as humans. If we go through and actually practice those things as lead measures, and what I mean by that is, instead of measuring belonging every day at the end of the day, forget that. Measure it weekly. You measure it 2 weekly. Measure doing these things. Pick 3 of these things you're going to do every day, and be conscious. Have your list. Go through. And by the way, it does have to be genuine. If there's one thing that just destroys belonging, and like empathy, you can't fake empathy. It's real. You can't fake a real compassionate thing. Everybody knows it. So, but if you do these things and you're genuine in the space, what's going to happen is you're going to get a return net effect. And that's going to create a space where it's bidirectional. And this is crucial for the leaders on the side of things, because if this isn't happening and kept in process, what ends up happening is some groups will do this for each other and some will do it for another, and you're going to get a division in your teams. And what you need is the whole team to be involved in this. And from these things, and these are just deeply human things that we all need. I mean, we do a results focus on business and work, and we kind of miss the point that at the same time, the job does have to get done. Nobody's in business to go out of business. But in that play, the being human part can't disappear. And these are just 7 things that if you do 3 of these every single day, you're going to watch a measurable amount of belonging go up, which there are easy ways to measure this. People say you can't, and they are better measured on the long term for sure. But you can have things just completely move up. And the reason these 7 things work is they're the things that actually create your team OS. And this is the serious game change. And here's what I mean by this. This is what you get with oxytocin. And it comes through when you have those 7 types of interactions. And empathy, generosity, cooperation, interpersonal trust, social motivation, the altruism. You get a better response for gaze focus on eyes and face, emotional recognition. These are all the things that you need to be able to do to have higher levels of when things go sideways and whatever you're trying to figure out, to stay in it together. Oxytocin is commonly called the love chemical. Well, it's also the hero chemical. And why it happens is there's a social motivation for each other. There's a generosity, a giving as opposed to I didn't get focus. The altruism for the team comes into play much more naturally. When your oxytocin levels are depleted, and this comes from the lack of all those human things that I talked about earlier, the 7 lead measures, what ends up happening is as it gets depleted, there's less initiative that comes from each other to actually be that better team player. The love for being a team player kind of goes away. The interesting thing about this is from a neuroscientist, Paul Zak, who looked at he's sometimes called a neuroeconomist because he looked at what happens in the brain and what happens to people when they have high levels of oxytocin. And the artificial measures for sniffing oxytocin, which is the thing supposedly you can do, which by the way, you'd have to pay for and have all this stuff and have it controls, where you can actually get all this stuff just by doing those 7 lead measures, is you have 74% less stress. And I will tell you this, there's a difference between stress that induces performance, because the stress doesn't induce performance. It's actually the looking forward and the aspiration of it, and a slight level of, we'll call it performance excitement, not performance anxiety. I want to call it performance excitement, where you're looking forward to it and your body actually is pumping itself up to be in a state of high performance. You're actually getting cortisol, but it's accompanied by oxytocin, and you're in with your team. And the more that this happens, the more jacked you get in a good way. It talks about he found that you have 106% more energy. You end up with a 50% higher level of productivity in this space when they checked with people, when they actually went through and measured what the people's levels were and so on. You have fewer sick days. If you're on the playing field longer and you're at the practices more, you get better versus like the sick days that take you out of the game. And you have a 76% higher engagement. These are all areas that have been tested to show that this is what you get from having good oxytocin levels, and they come from how you belong. Serotonin is the second part of it. There's the O, oxytocin, and then the S, serotonin. Serotonin gives you some crazy things that you're just not aware of. Most of the time we think of it as, oh, it sets us at a level set. It keeps us from being depressed, which by the way, it does. And maybe this is an element to know from the standpoint of your mental health of your employees. If they're in a good state of belonging, they're also creating higher levels of serotonin, which you get that leveling element, I kind of call that calm under pressure. You ever been in a situation, real difficult stuff? Somebody says, I need this to be done. You've never done it before, but you look at it and you go, oh, I got this. That's a calm confidence. And that's in part drawing upon your history of different things and looking at it. But that feeling, that stuff that actually keeps you present in that space to go, oh, I got this. That's your serotonin levels responding to the environment to bring you into a space of higher performance. Yeah, I got this. Bring it on. It makes the game work. The other thing that happens though with serotonin is the studies show you end up with faster learning. Some studies show that you get fewer errors. And one of the things that really talks about high performance, we think it's practice, practice, practice. Now, there is no replacing practice, but your ability to adapt in the moment is the difference between an elite performer and just a practice performer. To be able to make quicker, better decisions. And another thing, and if you think about it, can you just calm down so you can make a better decision? Well, that's what happens for the higher recall during a load of high cognitive demand, such as, oh, I was just going to do this thing for you all, and my back gets injured, and I can't even show up live to do this. By the way, that still stings for me, even though I'm getting better. But man, I really wanted to be there with you all. The end outcome of this is you literally will go out on a ledge with each other. And I want you to get this. That's a place where people just don't go and sit, because why would you do that? Why would you put yourself at risk? When you're together and you want to get a better perspective or something like that, you'll go to that edge and you'll take that position, because that's going to make for a better outcome in the company. So in closing, what I'd like to share with you is, if you belong and you create that belonging space in your company, because you gotta belong, that's going to put you into a higher level of performance, an elite space where you have each other's back, you're taking care of each other. And because of that, your brains are going to have what it takes, literally at a baseline neurochemical level, to be really in it with each other in the moment, in a calm space where you make better decisions and perform at higher levels. So thank you for giving this a watch. And if you get a chance, reach out to me and let me know how this may have either helped you and given you a little bit more clarity. Thank you and have a wonderful day.